Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Coffee Run with GM Espaleta. And today I'm pretty excited to talk with a friend of mine as we talk about how do I find my craft, niche, passion, calling, no? It's a question that many of us face at various moments in life, from choosing our college course, our first job, or even when we have like our family reunions na. So, what do you do, anak? Without further ado, I just wanted to talk to Frances to hear about her journey in finding and nurturing her craft as she journeyed from various places. So, Frances, welcome to the show.
Hey, GM, thanks for having me.
Lovely. Happy to have you here. Any chance you can just introduce yourself to people who aren't familiar about what you do, your background?
Sure. So currently, I'm an independent designer. I specialize in designing websites and also brand identities for different companies of all sizes. And then in the past, I worked at a fintech startup. Then I founded my own startup. Then later, I moved on to corporate. And then now I'm living the dream, freelancing full time and having just control over everything. So yeah.
Dream nga ba? Char. So I think we can talk more about the realities of pursuing your dreams as well later on. But maybe I wanted to start off with, can you just take us through that moment, no? It's senior year of high school and you have to make the decision as everyone does when they apply for their college, the colleges that they want to go to. What was that experience like? What was on your mind? Was it always like this?
Well, you know, GM, from an early age, I already knew what I wanted to pursue in college. So
Okay.
I knew that it had to be something art or design related. But the other side that people don't know is that I also wanted to pursue medicine.
Oh,
So now I have two options to choose from. Is it art or is it medicine?
but those are like the opposite sides of things, right? Like there's the fine arts and then there's the more quote unquote sciences. And so how did you feel like you knew that those were the two options? Let's go back to childhood.
Sure. Okay, so I'll talk about art first. Ever since I was a kid, I have always been perpetually bored. And I always asked my parents, "Hey, mom, I'm bored today. What do I do?" And then one day, my mom told me to fill up her old notebook with as many circles as I could. So I did that for the whole day. And my mom saw my interest in drawing. So she signed me up for art and crafts classes. I guess that was how I started my art and design journey. As for medicine, the funny thing is, most kids are afraid of blood, or whenever they
Same.
see guts of a fish, they get all grossed out, right? When I was a kid, whenever my mom would come home from the market, she would dissect the fish, take out the guts, and she'd tell me, "Look, oh, this is the intestine of the fish. This is the heart of the chicken." So at an early age, I was exposed to anatomy, I guess.
Yeah.
So that's what I found fascinating. And then at home, bedtime stories would usually be about how food moves from the mouth to the esophagus to the stomach. So, my mom isn't a doctor, but that's just what I was exposed to at an early age. So not only did I cultivate an artistic mindset, but I also had this scientific way of approaching things.
Super interesting. When you were doing your application, so you had those two choices. It felt like a crossroads, I can imagine. Do I choose more of the arts side, the creative side, or do I choose medicine or doctor? How did that decision go? What did you make? What made you go your path?
Mm. Well, my family wanted me to pursue medicine because I satisfied three things. Firstly, I was not afraid of blood. Secondly, I was good at memorizing things. And three, I had the immune system to work inside a hospital. So all those three boxes were checked. Plus, I excelled in science also.
So it's interesting you say that because you always had to come to a crossroads, at least in college, right? Deciding between creativity, deciding between the sciences. Those were your two paths. So ultimately, what made you choose the creative side of things?
Mm. So even if I knew that I excelled in the sciences, my gut feel just told me that my talents were better off utilized in the arts. At that time, I couldn't explain why I chose art over medicine, but I also feel like it's God's calling.
Oh, God's calling. Were there any signs? Sorry, not God signs, but then were there any signs during your high school or your childhood that you were doing the arts? Were you involved in like the school mural, if ever they have those?
Mm.
Any creative projects that you remember come to mind?
One thing that I remember about my childhood was that I was always very proactive when it came to pursuing anything art related. So even if my parents or my teachers, even if they never asked me to like join a competition or learn this, I would take it upon myself to just look for my own opportunities, be it, new courses, books, competitions, or just anything new to learn. So I think that that proactiveness is what helped me realize that I really love the arts. I really love design, more than medicine. And it would be such a waste if I don't pursue that. And I want to find out also what would happen if
Yeah.
I put my talents to good use, if I maximize all of these strengths. So that's why I picked an art course over a science course.
What was the conversation like when you made that decision? I'm sure your parents had to see it first, like your application.
Uh-huh. So I applied to four schools, I think. UP, Ateneo, LaSalle, UST, and the fifth school pala is CSB, no? So for UP, all the courses I picked were medicine related. And then in LaSalle, I think they were business related. UST was also medicine related. For Ateneo and TSB, they were art related. No? So I got into all five colleges. It's just that for Ateneo, fun fact, GM, I don't think I've told many people. I was actually a director's list scholar. So
Oh,
I think I was like top 1% of
easy.
the entrance exam, and they gave me a 25% discount on my tuition every semester from what I remember. And then I also passed the talent test of UP. So a talent test is a test you take if you want to study any fine arts course there, which means that even if you pass the UPCAT for a fine arts course, if you failed their talent test, you cannot take the course.
So they're genuinely assessing like, do you actually have the skills to be
Yes.
an artist versus
Yes.
do you just pass their UPCAT? Okay, interesting.
Yes. So even if I passed all five schools, the two schools which I gone for were really UP and Ateneo.
Okay.
I was really drawn to UP's fine arts department and same with Ateneo's. But when I had to choose when I had to pick between UP or Ateneo I not only looked at what I would be studying, I also looked at what the people were like or what's the environment like. All in all, I just felt that Ateneo offered a more holistic experience towards college. And that's why I chose Ateneo over UP. The good thing about Ateneo is that, yes, you have your major subjects and they're all art subjects, but you also study subjects like psychology, philosophy, theology, sociology, anthropology. And you may ask yourself, well, what do these subjects have to do with art or design? People might think, walang kwenta yan, sayang oras mo. And at some point, I did think that, oo nga, parang walang kwenta yata to. But later on in my career, I realized that no, actually, despite being a little bit insignificant at first, they actually played a huge role in shaping me as a designer. So I'm really thankful for my college days in Ateneo.
This episode isn't sponsored by Atenea.
It's not.
Disclaimer. There's no tuition cuts for either of us. But Super interesting. I mean, that holistic idea, it really depends on the person, right? It's a fit in terms of your own preferences, your lifestyle. And I think each person has their own quote unquote mold that fits better depending on the college. So you made that decision choosing Ateneo as your course. So what was that like in your day to day? I mean, coming into college, it's like people are still figuring themselves out, right? What was that experience like for you? I mean, you said you had talents, but can you just like walk us through like what was that experience like nurturing that talent at college?
Ateneo had several organizations you can join. And I think what made Ateneo stand out from all the other schools was its sense of community. By joining different organizations, you can feel that you are part of something bigger than yourself. And sometimes these organizations even work together in some initiatives. That's what I like
Yeah.
about Ateneo. Now, how does this relate with honing my design craft? As with any org, every semester they have a lineup of events. And for these events, of course, you have to promote them, right? With your marketing, you need
Yeah.
posters, flyers, invitations, and all. So whenever they look for somebody who could design these, I would always volunteer and say yes, even if I wasn't ready yet.
Did you know how to do Photoshop, design, digital space and all?
Before college, I actually do not know how. I was more of a fine artist, so I could draw, I could paint on paper or canvas, but I had no idea how Photoshop worked. Before my freshman year in Ateneo, I decided to learn a bit of Photoshop so I won't feel left behind in college. So I studied that, and every day I gave myself a prompt to do. So, for example, in Ateneo, when freshmen enlist for their subjects, they like designing their schedule. So, I would open Photoshop and I would design my own class schedule. I would use my phone to take a photo of something in my room. Then I would use that photo as my background. Then I would type some text and then tada, it's my design.
Uh-huh.
The next day, it could be something like, okay, design a cover for your notebook, or design a flyer for some made up event. So that was how I practiced. I learned by following tutorials, but I also learned by creating mock projects for myself.
Moving on from, prompts to actual org events. How did you evolve your craft? How did you evolve yourself in like design? Did you just keep making more or did you go through academic from your classes? Like how was that experience like to just keep leveling up yourself?
There were also classes. I took major subjects in art history, drawing, painting, typography, basic web design, basic graphic design, and other major subjects. So those also help. But if there's anything that significantly improved my craft, it was my time in Singapore. In Ateneo, when you reach your junior year, you have the option of doing an exchange semester abroad. So I did mine in Singapore. And some people may think, Frances, why can't you just go to France or Europe and enjoy your semester? You only live once, right? I did consider that. But I picked Singapore because I wanted to optimize for my learning. And I felt that Singapore had one of the highest standards for that, which is why I eventually went to Singapore. It was also on a full scholarship to NTU or Nanyang. And in Nanyang, I took four different subjects. So the first one was basic photography. The second one was 19th century art history. The third one was digital painting. And
Oh,
the fourth was illustration for designers, which was, by the way, taught by Hans Backer. So Hans Backer worked on the animated Mulan and a bunch of other classic Disney films. So he's a really, really important figure in the arts. He's a strict professor, demanded a lot from everybody, but it was for the best.
paint a picture. What was the classroom like?
Well, this is just my observation, but in typical classrooms, when the bell rings, what happens? Everybody leaves and they enjoy their break. In Singapore, it's different. When the bell rings, everybody goes near the teacher.
Oh, whoa.
Yes. They fall in line, and each person would have the teacher give his or her feedback on their work. On top of that, even if it's not your work that's being talked about, other students would also listen to the feedback that the teacher is giving the other student. So you could really feel that everybody wanted to learn from each other.
That.
They were just that driven. And for me, it was a culture shock.
So you're saying that at the end of the class, would you say everyone or like majority of the people would line up?
Well, majority, but I
Damn,
would say it's
still a
still
lot. That's
everybody
still a
because
lot.
everybody there is really, really driven and motivated.
So it's less of like specific exercises, but I guess just the routine that shook you. Uh,
Yes. And if the professor would say something like, okay, class, you should watch this movie because the animation is nice, people would go, oh, I know that movie. I love that movie. And it seemed like they know so much. Like they've done their research in their own free time. They know all of these notable artists and illustrators that they can even talk about these artists' contributions. So for me, that's just really impressive.
they were driven from the get-go. Coming with that culture, getting with that experience with your peers, what was it on your mind? Because when you do the term, you're already your junior year, right? So what were you thinking about in terms of career? I think it was happening there. Like you were getting there from college to, oh, it's gonna be graduation soon.
If you asked me back in my junior year what kind of career I wanted to pursue, I would have told you that my only dream was to work as a graphic designer in a big corporate firm, and that was it. But my way of approaching life totally changed after I came back from Singapore. Let me just tell you a short anecdote. So in Singapore, I was with 29 other people in my scholarship, and these people were from other parts of Asia. So China, Malaysia, India, Japan, Cambodia, and whatnot. And when I would compare notes with them, like they'd ask me things like, so what are you doing when you go back home to your own country? For me, I would just say, okay, I'll just take a break, right?
Yeah.
But for them, they weren't taking a break. They were getting internships here and there.
Mm,
And one thing that surprised me was, well, I'm pretty sure that nowadays Gen Zs have a lot of internships under their belt. I think it has become the norm for them to pursue internships ever since they were in high school. But
yeah.
during our time, GM, I
You
think,
make us sound so old. Back in my day.
well, we aren't that young anymore. Back in our day,
Back in our day.
most people would pursue internships in their junior year.
Hmm.
But maybe if you're an overachiever, you would start as early as high school or your freshman year. But it's just quite uncommon,
Yeah, it wasn't the
right?
norm.
It wasn't the norm. So when I heard that these people were having internships here and there, I was so shocked because all of a sudden my world felt so small. Like, seriously, Frances, your only dream is to be a graphic designer in corporate? Come on, think bigger. World's big. So it made me question everything. Like, am I pushing myself enough? What more do I have to learn?
Yeah.
And when you when you meet people who are different from you. So in Singapore, majority of my friends were actually from engineering. So I have friends who were in computer science, mechanical engineering, biomedical engineering, somewhere in business and economics also, but majority of the people I met were in engineering. And they were telling me all of these things about tech, like, okay, we have machine learning and AI and deep learning. And clueless me at the time was even asking them, so what's machine learning? What
Yeah.
what are neural networks? Please educate me. Right. So after telling me about this whole thing, it made me realize that, oh, tech is such a big thing. It's on the rise. Well, it's already a rising industry. So why haven't I thought of this? Maybe I should think of ways to integrate both design and tech together. That way I can future proof myself.
So you had all of those thinkings, learnings, takeaways from people in Singapore. Coming back here, how did that translate? What did you do?
When it came back, I felt a bit sad because studying in Singapore was my dream ever since I was 10 years old. So, you know, the feeling of having achieved your dream. And after that, you ask yourself, so what's next? Right?
Hmm.
So when I came back, I definitely felt a bit empty. So to fill that void, I attended as many design events as I could. And one of them was a conference called Graphica Manila.
Oh,
In Graphica Manila, they invite several speakers from different countries, and they would fly them here to the Philippines and have these designers talk about the groundbreaking work that they're doing. One of the presenters was Stink Studios. So Stink Studios is this design agency based in the States. And one of the projects they presented was their work for Google Earth. So their work featured an interactive experience of exploring different national parks in the States from the comforts of your own home. So you just have to open your laptop, open Google Chrome or Safari, and type in the address, and you can just explore the park from a website.
technology.
Yes, technology. And at that time, I was so amazed. I asked myself, hey, what do you call that branch of design where you do all of these cool things? At that time, I didn't know the answer. So when I got home, I had to Google. And the search result that showed up was, oh, it's user experience design. So then I asked myself, oh, what is user experience design? So after reading, I realized that wow, this is so cool because not only do you think about making things pretty, you also think about integrating other disciplines like psychology, computer science, behavioral economics, sociology, everything. So, in a way, I was drawn to it because if you remember back in high school, I was torn between a science course and an arts course. And I'm so glad I can now combine these two sides of myself, both the artistic side and the scientific side, into one discipline. So I get the best of both worlds. It's such a good field to pursue.
Yeah, you got the Hannah Montana best of both worlds. Sorry, I just
Yes.
had to say that. Before delving further on like the UX side of things, you've discovered it. You've had this idea or inkling about UX design. What were the next steps there to get better at it or to pursue this as a job?
Yes. So I realized that I only had a year and a half to hone my skills in UX because I only decided to pursue UX at the latter half of my junior year in college. So if you think about it, I think I was up against certain odds. I had to speed up my learning. Now I had this college blockmate. Her name is Kate Rustia. Shout out to Kate. One day during basic web design class, she was my seatmate, and I saw her drawing a bunch of
Squares.
squares on a piece of paper. I told her, "Hey, Kate, what are you doing?" And Kate told me that she was joining a UX design competition, which was hosted by User Experience Society.
Hmm.
And then Kate encouraged me to join, so I did. And to share some context, the contest was about coming up with a digital solution to a problem, any problem in Ateneo. So the problem that I wanted to tackle in my competition entry was the difficulty of applying for an exchange semester abroad. Now, I noticed that when I applied for my junior term abroad program, there was no website that documented all the requirements you have to make. Sure, there was, a Facebook group, but whenever there were announcements, it was hard tracking them. Sometimes people weren't even notified. And I do know somebody who initially wanted to travel to Europe but didn't push through because this person just missed out on a certain announcement. It's a sad story. And I felt bad for this person because an exchange semester is one of the most life-changing things you can do. And the fact that you missed it because you weren't informed is is such a waste to me. Sayang. So that was my competition entry. I created a website that had all the info you need when it comes to applying for a semester abroad. So all the requirements, the documents you have to submit, the different schools, the different programs being offered, they were all in the website I made. And then at the end of the competition, you have to present your work to a panel of judges, and so you should present things like, okay, this is the research I did. I interviewed X number of people, and these were the problems they had when applying for a semester abroad. From these problems, these are the different ideas I came up with, different design iterations I explored. And then from there, from these designs, I would test them out. I would get their feedback, and then like just the whole process, end to end. I had to present that, and fortunately, I was able to win first place.
Hey, I mean, it's great that you got first place. But did you enjoy the process? Because I think that was like your first time getting into UX design. Did you
Oh,
enjoy the process going through everything?
oh yes, I did. Everything was new to me,
Yeah.
fresh, and well, for me at that time, I felt like I was doing something high tech, even if it wasn't really like
She's a
super high
techie.
tech. When I was doing all of these things, I felt like I was Shuri from Black Panther. So for context, Shuri is, I think, the sister of the main character, and she's responsible for designing all the cool gadgets that they use. If I remember, I know at that time in 2018, Black Panther came out. Everybody was going crazy over it. And when I watched it, I told myself, I'm doing exactly that. I'm that techie Shuri girl designing, creating new inventions. I know what I did in reality was far from what she did, but you get the picture, right?
Hey, that's what you're feeling. So, I mean, can't discount that. You felt woman in STEM
Mhm.
power.
Yes.
So, you win that competition. It felt like, oh, I got something here. I'm on to something. Let's fast forward to graduation. When you were graduating, do you already have a job path towards UX design?
Before graduating, I did not have a job, but that was because I wanted to get an internship after graduation. And I know people again tell me, but Francis, you're a graduate now. Why are you pursuing an internship? And I tell them, because I want more experience. And they tell me, but you can get experience in a full time job. And yes, it's valid, but at that time, I just wanted to beef up my resume so I can get an even better job.
So, felt like you had conversations again with your parents or your family. It's like first time was choosing the arts or creativity in Ateneo. The second one is like, wait, what? You graduated and you're not getting a job? You're getting an internship? Was that like a hard conversation with them, or did they understand, like, oh, makes sense. You needed to get experience?
It wasn't a hard conversation, but that was because I timed it very well. I was strategic about it, I would say.
Strategic, how so?
If you think about it, as long as you And again, take this from me, but this is a life hack I did.
Life hacks.
Yes, life hacks. In order for them to feel comfortable with the idea of getting an internship after graduation, I had to say something that they like to hear first. And at that time, I was cum laude standing. So I told them, "Hey, mom, I'm cum laude." She was happy. And then I said, "Oh, and I also have this internship." "Oh, okay." So I think it's just how you
Package it.
manage up. Yeah,
Ever since you were a very strategic person, then. Okay. So you then did the internships here and there. You also got into a role, I remember, as a product designer. Maybe you can just like share your general experiences from that. What was it like being an employee?
sure. So my first job out of college was in a fintech startup called First Circle. I got to wear so many hats. When you work in corporate, it's important that you specialize in one aspect, right? So if you are a UX designer, that's all you do. But in startups, things are different. Sometimes you have to do jobs which don't even fit your actual job title. So I did things like I hopped on sales calls, I listened to what customers were saying, I had to learn SQL. I also had to interview customers and figure out what their pain points are. I had to read strategy documents. I had to understand how to do competitive analysis. So there was a lot of overlapping fields. There was sales, there was product management, there was a bit of the data side, a bit of the art side, since I did illustrations there in First Circle,
Mhm.
and also the UX side, which is good because it helped me become more well-rounded. But I also think that I think as designer, I think it's so much better if you know a bunch of other things beyond just knowing what fonts to pick or what are the best colors out there or what are the nicest shapes, right?
It's an interesting transition though, since I'd say when you were working in college, you're doing the competition, much of it was based on what you think is nice or what you think would work well. Granted, there are interviews, but now you're coming into a full time job where there are stakeholders, right? I think it's the first time you'll have stakeholders to deal with. Was that an adjustment for you where it was less of you in control, quote unquote, and it was more you working with a team towards a certain thing? I always think when you're working from like a graphic design, for example, there's that transition from, are you doing art for art's sake or are you doing art for a quote unquote business purpose? How was that like for you in that full time transition?
Well, you're right. In school, although yes, you get to do research on the projects you're given, I feel like design there was done in a vacuum because you don't really interact much with different kinds of people. In the real world, I had to talk to sales, I had to talk to data and product just to make sure that the designs I make sense for the customer or that they make sense for the business or that it makes sense for operations. Because if I just designed something that I think is right and I launch it, and if in the end it messes up people's day to day workflows, your design is basically, I mean, it defeats the purpose of designing in the first place.
But how did you feel about that? Like what I'm just imagining like fresh grad Frances getting into this new job and then learning about all of these things. It might have been or may have been overwhelming. So how are you trying to just like level yourself up throughout your career?
Well, you're right. The learning curve is indeed very steep. And you know what more if it's a tech startup, right? But that's that's the beauty of learning. If you don't push yourself, you're not going to grow. So I just approach it as a challenge. And I know that if I didn't know the answer to something, I could always ask people for help. People like you, GM.
Shout out. Thank you for that. And I think when you learned a bunch from their startup life, you were transitioning from an employee, you moved on to another position in another company. But I guess I'm a bit more interested in the jump now on employee to startup founder. What was it that, you saw yourself as like this UX designer, product designer? It's kind of like your craft, so to speak. What made you then dip your toes into the founder life?
Sure. So let me just share some context on that. Actually, my or our former manager, yeah, reached out to me and he asked if I wanted to help him out on his new startup called UX Plus University. Now, usually I would think, oh, I'm a designer. What do I have to do with being a co-founder, right? But I didn't see it that way. I saw it as a once in a lifetime opportunity. How often is it that your former manager would reach out to you and ask if you could help him start a business? At the same time, I also wanted to learn about what it was like running a business. Although I'm primarily a designer by trade, I'd like to think that I am a hybrid kind of person. I have so many interests ranging from science to business to art to music and everything. So if I could learn something within those disciplines, that would be
Yeah.
great.
What a jump.
What a jump.
What a jump indeed. Okay, so you took up that once in a lifetime opportunity. And how was that experience like?
This time, I assumed different roles. So at UX Plus University, I was both the co-founder and the chief of staff. UX Plus University is this 16-week boot camp that trains career shifters into becoming UX designers at no upfront cost. So what that means is if for example I am a student and I don't have the means to pay for an expensive UX education, what I'll do is I'll join the boot camp first. And if after the boot camp I get a job, that's when I do this income share agreement. So X% of your monthly salary would be paid to UX Plus University. It works that way. So what I did every day as co-founder and chief of staff was that I did partnerships. So I looked for companies that were willing to partner with us and hopefully give our graduates a job upon graduation. I did operations too. So I made sure that classes were running smoothly. There were assigned instructors for every class. The logistics of each class activity were fixed. I also managed interns. I designed a little bit also, and I was in charge of student success, meaning I help students get UX jobs, and if needed, I also coach them a bit with design related matters.
So basically, you did pretty much everything. Like
Yes,
from a well, maybe it is similar to your first stint. You had to wear multiple hats.
yes.
When I guess I'm seeing it like going through this journey of Frances throughout her years. There were these discoverings. It's like an RPG, right? Like you get your equipment, you level up on skills, you get a different sense of things. UX design was clearly one of them, branching from your background in the creativity side and also wanting to be a doctor. Then you move on to expanding your world, moving from a UX designer to a co founder who thinks not just about the UX of things, but also the business side, i.e., the revenue. You're also thinking about the customer success. Did you enjoy that experience, like being a co founder? It felt like you've just been leveling up throughout your years.
I did enjoy it, and there were a lot of things that I learned along the way as well. And for that, I'm grateful for everybody who I've met, be it the students or even my co-founders. Shout out to CSJ and Phil Smithson.
Nice. And yet there was still just this itch, which kind of transitions nicely to where you're at now. What was it? What was that on your mind, and what made you take that jump?
So while I enjoyed being a co-founder, I also know that I am a designer at my core. Design is my bread and butter. And so if there's anything that I should be doing at that time, it's design, it's craft.
When did you feel ready to make that jump? Or did you even feel ready to make that transition to become a freelancer?
I guess a good sign that it was the right time was because even if I didn't do anything, people just reached out to me and told me, "Hey, Francis, I need your help with this website of mine. Could you do it for me?" And so the projects just kept piling up,
Wow,
coming
haba
here
ng
and
hair.
there. So I thought, okay, I think it's about time that I venture out on my own and start this freelance journey.
So there were a lot of people who were working with you or reaching out to you. So to be clear, before you made that jump to become a freelancer, you already had things lined up. There were some projects that you had as a freelancer.
Yes, there were some projects lined up for me, but at the time I was a bit unsure as to whether pursuing freelancing is even right in the first place, which is why I had to have conversations with people who were ahead of me and just to get their point of view. And one of the things that I was told was that, like somebody did tell me, Frances, you can design websites pretty well, and you can also talk to clients, and this is such an uncommon skill to have. Why don't you give freelancing a go?
And the go, 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 you did.
Yes.
So what was the freelancing journey like then? I mean, you had some gigs lined up, but now it became your thing, your full time thing. Walk us through like just like the experience it's been like so far and some of the things you've learned.
Well, one of the best parts is that you have complete control over your time. If you want to sleep at 10 a.m. in the morning, by all means, go, and nobody would
Damn.
call you out for it. If you want to go shopping at 2 p.m., by all means, go do it. But as Spider Man used to say, with freedom comes
Great
responsibility. Yes,
responsibility.
great responsibility. So, even if I had all of this freedom, I had to keep myself in check because unlike working in corporate or in a startup where you would have your manager check up on you, right? When you work for yourself, nobody is going to push you. Nobody will tell you what to do. So if you get lazy and stack off, that's your problem. Nobody will clean up after you. So you only have yourself. You have to be very self-reliant.
Were there any like hard lessons you've learned as a result of that? Have you missed out like on a client or lost a deal or lost a project because of that freedom?
In terms of keeping track on things, I would say that I didn't really have much difficulty on that because I'd like to think that I'm a disciplined person. So that wasn't really much of a problem. The biggest thing that I had to figure out while freelancing was the question of how am I going to find my own niche? How am I going to set myself apart from other freelancers out there? Could be freelancers in Upwork or Fiverr. So it was more of an existential question like, what are
Oof.
you, Frances? Who are you?
Who are you, Francis? Who are you nga?
Yes. So how I got to that answer was brought about by a lot of reflection and looking back at the past. I asked myself, what were some things that people said I was good at? And did I agree with those things people said, or do I disagree? What are some things that I enjoy doing? And finally, what are some things that people are actually willing to pay me for? So I guess I'm referencing ikigai, what you love, what you're good at, and what the world needs.
So, what were you good at? What was like that? Can we go into more detail about that self discovery?
Sure. So to recap, if I look back at my career, I would say that I followed an extremely zigzag path. I started out as a fine artist who only knew how to draw and paint traditionally. Then I transitioned to being a graphic designer and learning how to illustrate digitally. Then I became a UX designer, and by extension, I learned different skills related to that. So things like UX research, UI design, prototyping, wireframing, and later on, Webflow. And in college, I learned art history. I learned basic photography. So, like, I guess I'm somebody who nearly explored all the different facets of design. Now, here's the thing. It's always easy to ask yourself, what do I like and what I'm good and what you're good at. But I also think that it's a hard question to answer, especially if you like everything. And for me, I liked everything. So, how did I pick? I asked myself, okay, which one of the things I tried were things that I'm okay with, but I don't particularly enjoy. So I ruled those things out. And then afterwards, once I have a smaller set of disciplines to choose from, I then asked myself, okay, so what are the things here that I'm actually good at? And I realized that I'm quite good at storytelling and also in the creative side of design. So when it comes to expressing ideas, that I think is my niche.
So you've discovered yourself to an extent. We had a lot of reflection of the past, but how about you now? Where are you now in your journey of this Frances Renaissance woman with her career? How
Mhm.
have the things been?
So right now, I primarily do websites, but what I specialize in are bespoke websites. So what are bespoke websites? Now, usually when people make a website, they just plug info in a template and then they hit publish and tada, it's done. But if you want something more custom made, right? You want your own visuals, you want your own animations, right? Everything is personalized for you, then you come to me. So that's what a bespoke website is. The other side, which I dabble in, is what I would like to call visual stories or visual essays. Now, I don't do a lot of work for that commercially, but on the side, I do those as my side projects. So, what are visual essays? So, visual essays are stories in website format. So, just imagine reading an article, an interactive story from the New York Times. When you read articles from the New York Times, there are instances where the article is not only informative but also interactive. So as you scroll through the article, things move, there are infographics here and there, and these small things like the animation, the color, the storytelling all help you better understand a certain piece of information. It's visual storytelling. So that's what I'm trying to experiment on with the websites I make. So one of the projects I did in relation to visual storytelling is a website that tackles the history of the terno, which is the Philippine traditional dress. For context, a terno is what the ladies would wear whenever there are formal gatherings like birthdays, graduation ceremonies, or sometimes even weddings. And the terno is a sort of garment with flattened sleeves, or what they would like to call butterfly sleeves. And the sleeves are also bell shaped. And the reason why it's called the terno is because the top and the bottom are matching.
Fair
Kaya terno.
enough. Ah, yeah. Okay.
So the reason why I decided to be a bit more experimental and just explore different ways on how the web could be interacted with was because I had this observation. I noticed that a lot of websites are very utility based. Like, for example, if I want to buy something, I will order something through an e commerce platform. If I want to get information on Taylor Swift's concert, I'm going to open a website. So everything is just functional. And there's nothing bad about functionality, right? But what about the softer side of it, the emotional aspect? If you think about it, what is the web? Why does the web exist? The web is a medium for us to consume information. It's similar to books or movies. But the only difference is when you look at the book, you can flip through its pages. You could inhale the scent of the book and feel the texture of the page. It's a very immersive experience. And the same goes for movies. When you watch a movie, you see several images flash before your eyes. So again, it's interactive. So if that's the case, why can't the web be the same? Why does the web always have to be static? I get it. Maybe from a developer's point of view, you could say, oh, it's because of the box model, which basically just means that thanks to code and all, lots of things end up looking like a bunch of squares, right? Which is not wrong. It had to be built that way for a reason. What I'm trying to say is, why don't we question it, right? Now, for from the business point of view, why can't companies like GMA have interactive articles that swirl and pop as you scroll through them? Maybe it's because making an article of that caliber is time consuming, just like not good for the business, right? A lot of things to consider. And I understand, but if there were no boundaries, what would you do? How would you have approached how would you have approached things differently? That's what I wanted to question or find the answers to in the kind of work that I'm doing with the experimental side of web design. And this is why I am quite ecstatic on what emerging tech could do for us in the future. Things like VR, AR, XR, and all these other pioneering technologies.
Where you are and looking back, I mean, our audience here in this podcast. Audience? Kala mo daming tao. Is there any advice that you'd give them throughout like this journey of yours?
If I were to give one piece of advice, I would say follow your curiosity. One of my strengths, which I am eternally grateful for, is the fact that I am a curious person. I like many things. I have many different interests that don't seem to relate when you connect one, and the other. Like, for example, I am into design, but I also like psychology or I like classical music. These are totally different fields, but because I'm curious, I just pursue them. I think it's important to always have a sense of play when approaching things. When you approach things with a sense of play, you wouldn't feel like you're doing grunt work. And if you do that, it would be so much easier for you to pick new things up, learn new things. I think learning is relatively easier if you have an open mind. When you don't constrain yourself to labels that you assign yourself. So for me, commercially, if I present myself, of course, I have to say, oh, I'm a web designer. I design websites, right? But personally, if you ask me, do I like attaching these labels to myself? I would say no. Why would I constrain myself to the title of a web designer when I can also be a graphic designer or an illustrator or an art director, a type designer, or just any kind of designer? I think if you eradicate the label that you attach to yourself, you're going to realize that you can be flexible in so many ways.
Francis, the creator. Tyler, move over. We need to use your title. I think throughout this journey or throughout this cuento, it really seemed like you were curious all throughout, open minded. And I think you're right. Like in terms of having a label, in terms of finding like this craft, this calling, it's not necessarily a result of what is the label I'm trying to get at. It can be more of, well, what am I curious about genuinely? And you can then zigzag your way somehow, some way to where you're gonna have an ikigai, so to speak. It's always just a learning journey. So, Francis, thank you so much for making the time in this podcast. I enjoyed our catch up.
And thank you so much, GM, for having me.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much. And till the next podcast, everyone. Kita kits. Bye.